So I'll just start with a little bit. Obviously, you're here. This is building systemic capacity to close the gaps for all of our learners and committing to a culture of collective responsibility and sustainable and systemic growth. We're going to be we're not going to talk directly about comfort zones today, but I definitely think that that'll come through as a theme. Because again, I will go back and forth between sharing and presenting my screen and also just having you follow along. I'll be clear. I'll make sure that you know what slide I'm on, but we'll just go through it. So the next thing we're going to do is just look at the All Learners Network slide and common agreements that the All Learners Network has for us. As professionals and lifelong learners who support all learners, we agree to have open dialogue, share the air, honor private think time, be fully present and engaged, take care of yourself, keep your video on when possible, appreciate that learning is a process and not an event, assume positive intentions, embrace struggle and challenge. There was also a link to the introductory slides that all participants will receive before the event as well. So in there. So if you didn't get that, I guess reach out to someone at ALN and they will be able to help you with that. All right, so I'm gonna pull up now, share my screen, and we'll get going. Okay, so just a little bit, I guess, about me. I serve Essex Westford currently as the Director of Learning and Instructional Impact, and I'm also serving currently as the Virtual Academy Principal, which has been a really awesome and innovative opportunity to put a system together to meet the needs of the kiddos who need to learn remotely. But this systemic work that we're going to be talking about today, for me, when I earned my second master's degree, actually, that I first started to really understand that there was a science behind systemic and sustainable capacity building in schools and in districts. But the really funny thing about that is, if I think about my own journey through education, starting from kindergarten, I've always been fascinated by this stuff, and this is how I know that. I was a kid who grew up with a lot of adversity in my life. And so school was an escape for me. Like, I loved going to school every day. And I'm not kidding, it was in kindergarten that one of my first memories is sitting on the rug. And I went to kindergarten, I was in the early 70s, and we had, they were called letter people. And this was in the northwest corner of Connecticut. And letter people were up on the wall in these big blow up balloon things. And I remember looking up there and I remember thinking, how does this all work? Like, I'm not kidding. And I was the kid in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. I wanted to stay in for recess because I wanted to help the teacher get set up for what came next. So I've always been fascinated with how it all kind of fits together. So again, it was about 10 years ago that I started studying it and applying it in a very informal way when I was working as a special educator. But then as I went into administration, I started applying it in a different way. So that's how I come here today to you with this. So our time together today, we're going to visit and reflect on systemic alignment and cultural need. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes with that and talk about school culture, like where we're currently at, I think, as a whole, and that idea of collective responsibility. We're also going to we're going to move from the idea of culture, the more theoretical stuff, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of like the technical components, because you can't have one without the other. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at just two of the technical components a little bit more closely, and then hopefully bring it all home for you, and you'll leave with some ideas, no matter what your role is, leave with some ideas that you could implement back where you are working. So culture, why, and the importance, and what is it? So we're going to watch a story right now. Okay. So let me just minimize this and stop that and go back to this. So what we just watched was obviously about penguins and Antarctica. But what are some things that you think that you just saw that might be applicable to shifting cultural norms in a school building? What did you just see in that video? Like if you think about the penguins and you think about their story, what could be applicable when you think about cultural norms that we currently have and maybe shifting those norms? What's applicable? Just a popcorn out, just unmute yourself and we'll do like maybe 3 or 4 suggestions. Anything that resonated with you?
I would say helping the people that are going to be involved in the change be aware of why this change is happening, and then what's their involvement in the change. Like, how does it affect them?
Yes, great point. Good. Another idea?
Team with a vision.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great. Thank you, Rick. Had that vision. One more.
I think the cultural change is a big part of that too. Talking the talk, walking the walk until it becomes part of the story.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. And hopefully, and today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, talking the talk and then walking the walk and how to, integrate those two things. So this Gusky quote, it is one of my favorites. It is, if you do not believe that all kids can learn well, then pick out the ones that you think can't. And if your reasons for identifying those kids are all about them and not about you, then you probably ought to consider another profession. It's harsh, right? But like, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? So if we say that the fundamental reason that we exist as a public education institution is to guarantee learning for all kids, do we truly mean that all means all? Do we truly mean that all of the students with whom we are entrusted to serve have equal opportunity to gain benefit from our high yield instructional practices? Do we mean that? So it's moving our thought process from not just that all kids have a quote right to an education, but that all children can learn and that all children will learn. So again, it's not that they all have that right, but they can and will learn regardless of their demographic. Demographics do not define destinations, or they shouldn't. Regardless of zip code, regardless of how much pigmentation they have in their skin, no matter how much money their parents might make, what they have in the bank, we believe in the principle of human potential. Can I get a thumbs up on that? Right? Okay. All right. How many of you have ever felt that you believe that, but how you do that is something that you struggle with and stumble on? When you think about that, all means all. I'm showing my age maybe a little bit here, but these two guys are from a show called The Muppets, and they would sit up in the balcony and they would make commentary on what was happening below them, right? So again, as you know, you're here because you know that we're going to talk about closing this gap today, right? So we're going to spend just a minute right now on what you currently have in place in your system or your classroom or wherever you are. And so what you currently have in place, and then what would systemic structures look like if we were truly to make what we just talked about on that previous slide a reality. So if we truly made that, mantra, like all means all kids are going to benefit from those high yield instructional strategies that we are utilizing in our classrooms. And how does culture align with that? So again, what do the systemic structures look like if we were to truly make this a reality? If you were up in the balcony like these guys, what would that look like? And maybe just jot some notes down privately or pop some in the chat if you want to. What would that look like systemically? What would you have in place from that 30,000 foot view or balcony view. And again, this is just this protocol from the balcony protocol that you have access to this now, obviously. Again, it's just a good way to get, if you're facilitating a meeting, it's a good way to get people kind of thinking about, again, the what's possible and that vision that Rick talked about a little bit, just a little bit ago, like what's the vision if we were to close these gaps and if we had the systemic structures in place for kids. So again, jot down, your own private thoughts, what needs to be in place for that. All right, so today you're going to hear me ask, how do you know, how do you know, how do you know, how do you know that you're doing the work that's the right work? There's an awesome book called What Do You Do with a Problem? It's actually a picture book. Anywhere you see in my presentation a yellow star like this, it means that you have a live link to a resource. So this is a live link to this book. And it's just, again, just, what do you do with the problem when you know that all kids are not achieving at high levels in our systems? When you know that so many of our systems say that, 65% of kids at achieving mastery is good enough. That's a problem. That's not all means all. That's not all kids achieving at high levels. So I think, if we're honest, and we assess ourselves on this, we do come up short a little bit. Because we do have obviously these achievement gaps and we can predict them. We just did an equity data analysis in Essex Westford, and we took absolutely all of the data points that we have and we put them through a lens of not only proficiency across gender and race, but we also did, economic status. And, when you put it all side by side and you find out that you have literally no students taking AP courses who are African-American, or no students taking AP courses who qualify for free and reduced lunch. That starts to shift the kinds of conversations that you're having. So again, it's, how do you know what the right work is? Do you go to work every day and feel to your core that you're doing the right work? Why or why not? And again, how do you know? What are you looking at for data? Are you using just the 30,000 foot view, summative assessments on a local assessment plan? Or do you really have a system in place where you're truly looking at formative assessment data on a rapid cycle, bringing relevant data to meetings and then acting on that data? Systemic growth requires that we intentionally provide opportunities to identify, again, the cultural shifts that we need to make, but also the technical shifts. But you can't lose sight of the importance of having both, because here's what happens. If you have good ideas that are technical ideas, think about programs, like programs that exist, get rave reviews. You think, oh my gosh, we should try this because we have this, this, and this going on. And then you implement, right? You implement this initiative. How many of you have ever had this experience? This is a great program. We implement the initiative, and anybody ever have the experience where it doesn't gain the traction that you hoped it would? Right? Not that because it's not a good program, but that's the technical component. There's the potential there. But again, a structural change or a technical change, structural changes, I consider technical changes. I'm happy if anybody disagrees with me on that, but structural change that is not supported by cultural change will eventually be overwhelmed by the existing culture. because that's where your organization finds your meaning and your stability. That's what people know, right? It's what happens. You know, I often kind of say this, like, I can present to people, I can have faculty meetings, I can have meetings with administrators, you know, and everyone can be in that meeting and they can agree with me. And honestly, that's not what I care about. I care about what happens in the conversations after the meeting is over. That's what I want to know. I want to know if we have resistors. I want to know if we have believers. I want to know if we have people who, you know, who need to know more before they can fully embrace the idea, and allow the time to pause on that. Say that up front. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple of different change models, and we're going to talk about the power of saying that up front. But again, culture will eat technical and structural for breakfast, time after time after time. Now, that being said, inspirational cultures are supported and sustained by very intentional actions that are systemic and technical, right? Because how hard is it to maintain that positivity, right? And that embracing the idea that all kids can learn and we're all in it together if you don't have the right things to fall back on. Like if you don't have time for collaborative meetings, right? Or if you don't have the resources that you need. So again, I really do get goosebumps on this stuff. Like the idea that you have to have both and really develop that understanding at all of the different levels of your system and how it all works together. So I don't know, let's just like share with each other, maybe in the chat, just pop in some words of inspiration, like one word that comes to, or like a phrase, like we're in this together. Right? That feels good. Like if you're in a culture, in a school, or in a district, like where you say, we're in this together. Are there any other things that you can offer to the folks who are in this Zoom with you today, you know, that are inspirational words, right? Because we need those. So we're in this together. I've got your back, you know, like, let's just pop some in and just get some inspiration from each other because we can easily get overwhelmed by this work too. It's not easy. So thank you. All right. So creating this consensus for a culture of collective responsibility. Again, so culture of collective responsibility based on these two fundamental beliefs, right? So we as educators must accept responsibility to ensure high levels of learning for every child. And while we know that those outside forces certainly have an impact, right? Whose actions ultimately determine each child's success in school, right? So that's the first fundamental belief. The second one gets back to that Gusky quote that we heard a few slides ago, and that's that all students can learn at high levels. So here's where we start to talk about technical and structural alignment to the cultural idea that we're all in this together. And we start talking about the professional learning community process. When I say PLC, just give me a fist to 5 if when you hear the word PLC, you're a 5 if you've had training with Solution Tree, you can recite the 4 questions in your sleep, and you use PLC practices with fidelity with your teams. So that's a 5. Like you've been to those trainings, you know the PLC work. So that's just a fist to 5. Or is anyone a 5? Okay. All right. How about I've never heard of the Solution Tree PLC process before. This is absolutely brand new to me. That would be a 1. Is anyone a 1? I'm just going to go through. Okay. Perfect. Great. Good. Okay, I'm just going to check my chat here real quick. Okay, thank you. Keep moving forward. It's about the students. Awesome, awesome words of inspiration. Yes, school teachers as opposed to classroom teachers. Yes, great. Okay, 3. Okay, thank you. Good, good. Okay, so utilizing the PLC structure right now, I believe actually is more important than ever, because in the midst of a global pandemic, like when else is it most important to focus on your essential learnings, right? And that guaranteed viable curriculum. So PLC is all about what is it that we want all kids to know and be able to do. How will we know that they know it? How will we know? What's our evidence? What do we do if kids don't meet the benchmarks that we need them to meet? And then what do we do for students who have met the benchmarks, who are ready for some extension activities? So obviously, you know, we all know we're practitioners, so we know that we have some achievement gaps to overcome in our systems. And the Jim Collins work in his book, Good to Great, is just a really great way, I think, to think about cultures of good enough. I know I've been involved in conversations where people have said things like, you know, 70% is good enough. Or we kind of accept it as a cultural norm, you know, that students on IEPs or students who might qualify for Title I won't achieve at the same high levels as students who don't have those factors. But Jim Collins, this quote, you know, no matter how much you've achieved, you'll always be merely good relative to what you can become. The moment that you think of yourself as great, your slide toward mediocrity will have already begun. And again, that gets to that commitment that we must have in our schools for all kids. You know, and Jim Collins, he has an interesting little analogy that he talks about, and he talks about if you could be a fox or a hedgehog, what would you be? So if you could be a fox or a hedgehog, what would you rather be? And he talks about most people choosing to be a fox because of the appeal, I guess, of a fox, like, you know, beautiful, sleek, cunning, and not a hedgehog who's small and prickly and found, you know, quiet, plodding, that kind of thing. So he'll say, when he does a workshop, he'll say, so what do foxes and hedgehogs have to do with success? And in short, he says everything, because it's about learning the art of simplicity and the art of pausing and what is most important, and creating a clear focus, because the hedgehog outwits the fox, because the hedgehog is only focused on survival, that one thing. And so that's why it's better to be a hedgehog than a fox, because you're guaranteed that you're going to survive, because that's what you focus on. So anyway, good to great. Just another thought, you know, again, culturally, how to build that culture that we want. You know, anytime you think of yourself as great, your slide toward mediocrity will have already begun. So good to great, Jim Collins. Okay, so another question that will just help me get to know you all as a group just has to do with John Hattie and his research. So again, just a quick 1 to 5 in the chat. Are you familiar with John Hattie's work? Again, 5 means you're familiar with it, you use it, you talk a lot about collective efficacy, you understand the 800 meta-analyses that were done. And a 1 would be, no, I don't know John Hattie and I'm not sure. Okay, great. We've got some 4s, some 3s, a 1, great, okay. Okay, so we'll talk just a little bit. So John Hattie, so John talks about collective teacher efficacy, and you can see the table here having an extremely significant impact on results. And that when teams of educators believe that they have the ability to make a difference, exciting things, awesome things happen in schools. Hattie's research actually goes back to the 1970s when there was a psychologist at Stanford who uncovered just that dynamic within multiple working groups, not necessarily just educators, which is something that I don't know that everyone realizes. But in 1977, he observed that there was the group's confidence in its abilities seemed to be associated with greater success. So in other words, the assurance that a person places in his or her team affects that team's overall performance. And again, researchers have since found this to be true across many domains, and especially it's getting a lot of attention in education right now, for sure. So that's Hattie's stuff. Let me just see. So yeah, if you just look here, so collective teacher efficacy is at the top right now, student expectations. You see RTI, response to intervention. So these are correlated to a year's worth of growth for kids. So you can see that collective teacher efficacy has a high impact on a year's worth of growth for our students and closing those gaps, you know, all the way down to teacher subject matter knowledge. Isn't that interesting? That in this, again, meta-analysis, collective teacher efficacy has more positive impact on student learning than teacher subject matter knowledge. Anyway, it's just interesting. Does anybody have any questions at this point about anything that we've touched on so far? Okay. So, intersection of culture and change. We're going to do a little bit of connecting with each other for a minute. You're going to talk about how SIPs are implemented in your school. When I say SIPs, continuous improvement plans. So how are they implemented in your the system that you are currently in? Who participates in designing the continuous improvement plan? How do you know that the actions that you are deciding to take are meaningful? And I think, you know what I think we might do? I think we might just do this as a group right now. We won't do breakout rooms necessarily. So let's take turns and unmute and talk about continuous improvement plans. And I'm actually going to stop my share right now just to come back to the group. So continuous improvement plans are, in theory, the driver of change in our public education system. Yes? In Vermont, you guys all right? Okay. So if you think about continuous improvement plan, again, we won't do breakout rooms, but can somebody give me an example, like how do they come about? Who designs the continuous improvement plans in your districts or in your schools?
So it should be a group effort between students, parents, staff, looking at the needs of the students, the whole community, and then deciding. I mean, it's a pretty involved process if it's done correctly, and then come up with 2 to 3 usual goals.
Yes, right, correct. Do you have that process where you currently work?
Yes, yeah, I'm a principal at a school, so.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Rick. Good.
Our district has also included board members to make sure that all schools have a representative board member to make sure the plan has some real understanding at the board level.
Great. Yeah, good. That true community involvement. Okay. Others? Is that the experience across the board in this room? Again, you know, it's okay if it, yep, good. That's awesome to see that thumbs up. There is a, there's a, oh, go ahead.
Actually, it's on hold due to COVID. There's kind of a moratorium on even bringing that document to light. So I don't know if we're kind of an anomaly or if that's kind of the general consensus based on where we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that, you know, I'm hearing a lot, and I know we have too, you know, sort of, you know, backed off on some things just to allow for greater capacity to deal with things, you know, the safety issues and stuff too. But okay, so I'm seeing some thumbs up for sure on that process. Because, you know, SIPs in theory, they really should be the drivers. And again, they should have that, you know, that community involvement, teacher involvement for sure. You know, and then people should also know what actionable steps they can be taking regardless of role in the organization. So, you know, everyone has a role in improvement. And so one of the things that, you know, folks to be really intentional about is in your SIPs, you know, we tend to break ours down and have, you know, our shorter term goals, and then always pay attention to what resources we need to be able to achieve that goal. So it's like the goal, what additional resources are needed, what additional professional development, if any, you know, how will we know that we're on the right track, you know, those short-term and longer-term benchmarks, you know, and again, what is the teacher's role, what is the administrator's role, what is the student role, family role, community role, all of that. So yeah, dynamic process for sure. Okay. So the last slide that I showed you was the managing complex change chart. And as we've gone through our presentation today, you have all hit on components of that managing complex change chart. So here it is. So in some of our conversations and in our chats and stuff, I know that I heard the word vision. We talked about resources. We talked about, you know, SIPs or our action plans. Just take a look at this chart. So this is managing complex change. It's a resource that came my way through a consultant that I was working with about a year ago. And it talks, you know, you can see vision, skill, incentives, resources, action plan equals the change. If you lack that vision, but you have skills, incentives, resources, and action plan, you get confusion, vision, and you know, and so on and so forth. So you can take a look at that. So again, that just, it's a nice visual that just helps us to really embrace the idea of the complexity of moving systems forward and closing gaps. This is a change model that I started using in my work when I was a principal. And this is all about, because I often say, like, you cannot discount the human factor in anything that we do in education. Like I mean, we just have to honor, you know, who we are as human beings and what we bring to the table. And so, you know, back when I was a principal and we were working through standards-based grading and some pretty significant, some needs around our school, some behavioral issues. This is something that I presented because, again, if you're going to move things forward, you want to be sure that you're paying attention to the culture. And no better way to pay attention to the culture is to really understand and give people an opportunity to express how they're feeling about whatever it is that you're talking about. So what Kubler-Ross does in this change model is it acknowledges that idea that education is emotional work because the problems that we are trying to solve are so difficult, right? And because if they were straightforward, we would have found them already, right? So we can only make those meaningful shifts and those improvements in learning for all if we bring in everyone's perspectives and hear voices that maybe historically, like, we haven't heard, you know? So creating that psychological safety for your teams, for the folks that you're working with, is really a fundamental factor for those high performing teams and getting that culture that you want. And I just a quick example, last year was my first year working in Essex Westford. And one of the things that was very clear that we needed to establish our essential standards. And this was one of the first things that we did. We said, okay, here's our goal. For the year, we're going to establish our essential standards K-8 in literacy and math. How are you feeling about this? And we gave this some time and we said, find where you are on this change curve and what do you need to be able to move forward. Like, here's the train, here's the bus, whatever you want to call it. Like, we're going down this path, but we can stop along the way and get you whatever it is that you need to help you move forward. And we want to acknowledge that this is a process. So again, shock, denial, frustration, depression, experiment, decision, and finally integration. It's something that you definitely want to be paying attention to. And this is another change model. This is Cotter's. And Cotter's model is more of a collective, how a group functions through the change process, and less about the Kubler-Ross, which is the more individual. So anyway, this is, again, when you think about the managing complex change chart that I showed you a little bit ago, this is, again, just another way to think about this. And actually Cotter. So this model right here is actually the model that's used to illustrate the penguin and the iceberg story that you heard back at the beginning of the presentation today. So that penguin and iceberg story takes you through the Cotter change model. And I can say I found the most success when, again, you pause and you take time to do all of that work. So now we're going to explore the essential technical components of the systems that we hope can close the gap. We just talked a lot about the cultural components. So now we're going to talk about the PLC, the RTI, and ultimately the MTSS work. So again, just a reminder that any of these little yellow stars are live links to resources that I'm going to be talking about and referencing as we go through this process. So PLC, when I talk PLC, I'm talking about the solution tree model of PLC work. And that is the 4 questions, driven by the 4 questions. But if you're a PLC school, the PLC schools that implement with fidelity, they implement all of those concepts. The 3 big ideas are learning for all, building a collaborative culture, and focusing on results. So again, if we think about the earlier portion of our presentation, we were talking about that culture and the need for that. And again, the PLC and the RTI work help to bring those technical components in. But what I love about this work is it acknowledges the need for that cultural component as well. And again, I always say we also must be intentional about the pace with which we are doing this work, because you cannot say that you're going to do it all at once, or else what will that do to your system and your culture, right? Especially now with everything else that we have on our plate. But I think you'll find that some of these steps really can be implemented to really help you close those gaps. So again, connecting it back to culture, collective efficacy, this is what PLC is all about. Collective efficacy, collective responsibility, working together and sharing the weight, so that you're not doing this work, this hard work in isolation. Again, just my plug. Why should we be doing this now? Because it's more essential than ever that we are really clear about what kids must know and be able to do, and that we're aligning our resources to those ends. Because our time is in many cases reduced. Kids are dealing with, learning in different ways and different platforms. There's a lot of stress out there right now. Learning for all does not mean that all kids learn at the same pace. But it does mean that we're going to maximize the potential for all of our students. We're going to do what we can to mitigate the obstacles that we can influence. well, I'll wait because we're going to talk about team norms in a little bit, and we're going to talk about how conversations go in team meetings. But, you know, we have to take into consideration real obstacles and do whatever we can about those. PLC and RTI integrated is about a loose, tight leadership and culture. Like we say in Essex Westford, we're really tight on our essential standards being the driver of learning. And we're really tight on, and I revisit this a lot. In fact, PLC groups are meeting right now, and I recorded a little video for them to watch to help guide their work. And it's stuff that I've said, you're meeting in your PLCs, you're talking about your common student-friendly targets, and you're talking about what assessments, what evidence do you have that students are meeting those targets? And then you're setting a goal. Some people in the PLC process, they think about, a SMART goal, and that has to be a really complex thing. I say it doesn't. I say a SMART goal, if you're meeting with a group of colleagues, you have your common target, you have your common formative assessment, it can be an exit ticket. It doesn't have to be an elaborate thing. You have a conversation about how your kids did. You have a conversation about how, one of your colleagues achieved maybe different results, and then you set a goal and you go forth and do. It's that direct empowerment, but it's like keeping the train on the rails. You know what I mean? Like there are certain things, again, that loose, tight leadership and culture, like things that we're tight on, that we know that you can count on for sure, that creates that common communicative foundation. I think that people in our district would know that, yes, we're aligning our resources toward our essential standards for our kids right now, right? That's tight. How they do that, that's the autonomy, but I think it's Marzano that says that if we were to use, I think the Common Core, like for a guaranteed viable curriculum for all of our kids, we would need to add, I don't have this direct quote, but I think he says we'll need to add 5 years of school onto the years that we already have. So again, that's a reason to then pare down and to really focus on what's most essential. Essential standards don't mean that that's all that you're teaching. Focusing on essential standards means that's what you're focusing on. You're going to provide your intervention on. That's what you're saying is most essential for kids. They have that leverage. They contribute to the readiness and what comes next for kids. So again, this work is about making it happen. The key is you want to culturally build your consensus and then get started doing the work. Because in some ways, like some people, depending on where you fall on that change curve, if you don't get started, if you wait too long, you might lose momentum, but you also don't want to take on too much. I know I mentioned that a little bit ago too. You want to be careful about what you do and that it's truly aligned with your current culture and the resources that you have. All right, so tight elements of a PLC. The rubber hits the road with this process when you ask the question, how do we respond when our kids aren't learning? A learning-focused school can't achieve the mission of high levels of learning for all without a systematic process in place that ensures that struggling students have additional time and support that they need to succeed. That being said, if that additional time and support is happening at the same time that first instruction is happening on the grade level essential standards that you've all identified are the most important, how will you close the learning gaps for your students? And that's something that trips us up in our systems, I think, because we think, again, culturally, where we have been has been, oh, okay, so if it's time for math, then makes sense that I'm going to do my math intervention when the classroom teacher is teaching math to all of the other students. Yes? Or I'm going to do IEP services for math at the time when math is happening in the classroom first instruction. We are working with extreme intention to shift the mindset around that and the culture around that, so that intervention on those essential standards, that doesn't happen when first instruction is happening for those essential standards. Now, that's where, again, culturally, like you might be on a team, you're all about that. But technically and systemically, if you don't have a schedule that allows for that to happen, what happens to your culture? Right? What happens to the enthusiasm and the collective efficacy, right? It's easy to see how you need all of those things to work together. So anyway, so you can see these are the tight elements of the professional learning community right here. And this comes from Learning by Doing. And that's kind of like the PLC manual. It's a thick book. You have a link to it at the end of the presentation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is the PLC, okay? This is an example agenda of a PLC meeting. This is not an Essex Westford one, but we do have them that look a lot like this. But this just comes, this will lead you to like a plethora of other resources. Again, Yellow Star live link. I don't know, I love this little cartoon too, so here you have this little kiddo, 3 + 4 = cat. On the plus side, it's definitely something for your PLC to chew on, right? Cute little, okay. All right, so again, agendas that are focused on student learning, an essential component of a system. All right, so now we're going to talk about RTI. So PLC and RTI are not two separate things. And when I talk about RTI, I'm not talking about a way by which students would access special education. I'm talking about response to intervention as connected to what's happening in the conversations in those PLC meetings. So RTI for us is about tier 1 instruction, tier 2 instruction, and tier 3 instruction. So it's about a reverse pyramid. Tier 1 is your core program, tier 2 is your supplemental program, and tier 3 is your more intensive supports in your IEPs. So that's that culture of collective responsibility. So again, one of the things that I have always appreciated about this model, the PLC model and the RTI model, and it goes back to my first, oh my gosh, I was at a conference in Florida a long time ago, listening to Rick DeFore, who's considered the father of all of this work. And then I went to a Mike Matos event that was all about this work, and it was all about the integration and the power of first instruction, and then those the tier 2 interventions. And they talked about culture as connected to the technical components, and I thought, absolutely, you need both. Again, you all know that I've been loving this stuff since I was really little, but yeah, so again, culture of collective responsibility, again, tools for you, things that you should have in place if you're going to implement with full-on fidelity and get to that point of systemic cohesion, alignment, and stability that can close gaps. So here's the book, again, live link right here. Taking Action is like 350 pages. It's a research-based framework, this response to intervention, and definitely relies on data-based decision-making. And you can use it for academics or behavior. The book is 350 pages, and what I've done is I've taken out the 3 key ideas from the book, but you've got it. It's a live link. It's an amazing resource. So we just talked about the cultural essential actions for RTI and systemic for RTI and the systems and the PLC. But here's the technical. So again, when I say you have to have cultural and you have to have technical. So you want to have those essential standards identified, have your unit plans, have that teaching assessing cycle, that PDSA cycle, those common assessments, You've got teacher team essential actions that are technical, and you also have school-wide essential actions, okay? So you've got both of those things that are happening in the context of PLC. It can be done. It can be done. So let me just go back because I don't think I was clear about this. So these are essential actions, tier 1, first instruction, okay? Then we have tier 2, essential actions. So you can see that here we get into action 1, design and lead supplemental interventions for academic, again, essential standards. You see that word coming through. Essential standards does not mean that this is all that we're going to teach. It just means that this is our guaranteed viable curriculum, that we are guaranteeing that we're going to focus on this. This is what we're going to focus our interventions on. This is what we're going to focus our resources on, so that our kids, again, you're going to increase the likelihood that you're going to take your gap that might look like this and go like this if you're focusing your resources on those essential standards. We've actually this year, for the first time, all of our essential standards are in goal view, and that is what our special educators are pulling from when they are putting IEPs in place for kids. So whether if you're on an IEP, you're working on these essential standards. If you're receiving an EST plan, you're working on these essential standards. If you're receiving Title I support, you're working on these essential standards. If your team has gone to their PLC meeting and they find that, you know, through that formative assessment process, you know, you're a student, you don't have an IEP, you don't have a, you know, EST, and you don't have a title plan, but that doesn't matter because you're still going to get additional intervention on those essential standards, because that's what the interventionists are working on. And if there isn't an interventionist on your team, that's okay, because your teacher is going to work on some small group instruction and provide you that additional intervention in the classroom. Huge cultural shift. Okay. Well, so reverse pyramid. So all kids at the top get core program. Then you have supplemental supports, and then you have intensive supports for a smaller population of kids. So what I did here was I gave you an example of the inverted pyramid that has been completed for one of the model PLC schools in the United States. I will tell you that in Essex Westford, we started this work last year, and some of our schools have this completed, but some don't yet. Again, we want to just be really mindful of where people are and their capacity to do this work. This is a lot of work, right? Again, live link here for you to explore, resource. But the folks who have implemented this, here's what has been so inspiring for me. And I actually just put it in my little recording that people listen to because I can't be with them right now. Like, we have teams, like they started meeting in PLCs like bi-monthly, like twice, you know, every other week, right? To talk about this work within those tight frameworks that we talked about a few slides ago. And they now, some of those teams, they're now meeting like twice a week on their own. Like they've seen the power. And so they're having their meetings more regularly, and they're implementing their PDSA cycles even more rapidly. And our data, we saw pretty impressive formative stuff going on right now. A lot of work to be done with our local assessment plan too, but we'll get there. Okay, so individual reflection time right now. So you have your essential action charts that are in your presentation. You can click through them. What, if anything, have you done in your school? Like, what's in place for you right now when you think about essential standards, you think about student-friendly learning targets? You know, you can go back to any one of those slides and take a look and see, you know, what you have in place right now and what you feel good about. So let's take like 5 minutes to do that. So it'll take 5 minutes, shut your camera off, do some private reflection, review those essential action charts that are in the slide deck. And what do you currently have in place? What's working? 5 minutes. So when you looked at those charts, those essential action charts, do you have things in place already that you can build on, or where?
Right now, we're kind of at ground zero and rebuilding our MTSS system. And so I think we have 5 people right now, maybe it's 6, that are kind of acting as a think tank right now to reimagine what our MTSS could be. And kind of where we've landed, it's some of the things that you've said, like Mike Maddos's work and some of the DeFore stuff. We used to do PLC groups, and that was a long time ago, but they were so successful. And I don't know when, I can't remember when we kind of lost that, but we're kind of rethinking how we might do that now and how we can have more people at the table, not just the classroom teachers kind of coming together to wrap around students as a whole, but also, you know, bringing like the special educators and the interventionists to the table, or the special ed paras, and how when we're thinking about scheduling in the fall, because it's obviously not going to happen this year, but we want to be thoughtful by the time we get to May, what that could look like, but having everybody come to the table and, you know, thinking about everybody's roles and what that PLC could be. And when we're building the schedule, how we put the PLC structure, like everything is built around that PLC structure. So how can we take our resources and use them smarter?
I mean, I'm just full of ideas right now for like just thinking about like facilitating like a futures protocol with your group. We did that in EWSD last year with a couple of different groups. You know, this year we actually aligned our budget conversations around time. And like, it was like, so, okay, so we're going to have budget conversations, but we're also going to have conversations about resources that are not monetary at the same time. And we built this amazing visual, and I almost shared it with everybody, but then I was really cognizant of the fact, like, I'm sharing so much, like, but like, so we have this visual that breaks out like budget and education and alignment of resources, all toward, again, that guaranteed viable curriculum. So that's something else. I'm happy. And I'm actually on a book review committee for Solution Tree right now. So I'm working really closely with Mike and Jack, 2 of the consultants. So I'm happy to share with you. I'm all about sharing, like totally.
I don't actually work in a school, but you know, when I think about institutional change, I think from my standpoint in watching instruction, we're often asking teachers to do something that's really brand new in many cases. And we're asking them to teach in a way that they didn't learn. They didn't learn. And if you look at research about why teachers teach the way they do, the #1 influencer is you teach how you were taught and how you learned something. And so we're asking them to teach in a way that they didn't learn, through a way that they didn't learn, which is drastically different than a lot of other countries. You know, I've watched teachers teach all over the place, and I'll say that the best teachers I've ever seen are American teachers, the best American teachers. But so you can be mediocre in a place like Japan, and all you have to do is teach like you were taught. And if you do that, you can be very successful in a place like that. So I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that this is new for a lot of people. It shouldn't be. We've known this stuff for decades, but for most people, this is brand new.
Thank you.
And brand new is scary.
Scary, right?
And asking me to stand up in front of my kids and do something that I'm not 100% confident with is not going to last for the long haul.
Exactly.
So I think change, what we're asking people to do, has to be small steps, has to be doable, and it has to be lasting over a long period so it becomes habitual. And then you take the next small step until that becomes habitual. But change in schools doesn't often work like that. We want something quick, and we want something that's a silver bullet that's going to magically raise test scores, and that's just not how it works.
It's so not how it works. Right. Thank you for that.
I mean, the interesting thing in this COVID environment, though, changes happen rapidly, regardless. And in some ways, thinking about using data, it's become easier. Just because all of a sudden people are put into a very different learning environment than they're used to. I mean, there's plenty of negatives, but some of these opportunities, especially around using data, because all of a sudden we have more resources and I guess capacity to dig into it a little better, which is odd because everything else seems to have less capacity to handle. So I think even though, you know, districts are struggling, this is actually a big opportunity to make some of these shifts. I know we, especially when we're thinking about RTI practices, have been able to shift quite a bit in through data teams, getting them finally off the ground. So I think this COVID environment in some ways has been a good thing from schools. I'd be curious how we all come out of it on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, there are, in the presentations, there's a few tools linked for data teams. And one of the things that, you know, I wanted to talk about too is just as simple as it sounds is norms, you know, and really making sure that when you're getting together that, like, you know, the norms that you've had go beyond like the nice norms, like we're going to start and end on time, like that's really important, but that, you know, we're going to bring fresh, relevant data to the meeting and we're going to have a conversation about it and then we're going to act on it, you know, like that's a norm. Or that, you know, we're leaving the meeting confident that our time together had a positive impact or will have a positive impact on student learning, or on, you know, I'm leaving with greater ideas and better understandings of how I can meet the needs of my kids, or so, you know what I mean? Like just norms that go a little deeper for those data teams. But yeah, no, it's complex, so much. And what I hope though is that, you know, for this smaller group and for the larger group, you know, like that people would leave like inspired and like have, like I said at the beginning, you know, a couple of ideas, even if they're, you know, conversation starters, or, you know, hey, have you know, taken a look at this resource, or hey, did you know about this? Or, you know, we really haven't had a conversation about, you know, how, you know, culture and technical components really do need to, you know, we need to pay attention to both of those things, or in an intentional, very intentional way, or, you know, anyway, so that was my hope for today. It's so much, like if you could do, you know, an entire course plus, I mean, one of these components could be a whole day, easy, over a course, you know, and you have to, like I said, I'm revisiting it in Essex Westford, you know, all the time, and we have so much work. So anyway, that's about it for our time together. I hope that this was worth your time to talk with me and spend some time. So